So, no, I guess there's no skip for this week, but, I mean, I did learn how to do this.
It's a Friday once again.
Hello, my fellow freaks, and welcome back to the channel. I hope you have all had a great week. Now, this week we are doing another audience recommendation. So far, everything except for New Year's Evil this month has been an audience recommendation. If you can't tell, I'm trying to bust quite a few of them out. However, this one did not come to me through the Wheel of Fate as the other ones have. Instead, it was kind of chosen in last week's live stream. I'll put a clip in right here of that happening. Do you know what you're watching this week, or is it the Wheel? I was thinking about doing the Wheel. Do you maybe have a suggestion for this week? I will be open and listen to it, because I have not chosen anything yet. You do not yet? Okay. Okay. Because otherwise, I will probably just do something random from the Wheel. There's somebody who's been on my channel for, like, quite a while. And they gave me like one of the very first recommendations that I got, and I'm kind of thinking about just going ahead and choosing that. Yeah, go for it. I think I am. It's called Krull. You love Krull? Okay. Okay. I'll watch Krull. I'll do Krull this week. How about that? We just decided. So this week we are looking at something very different. And by that I mean it's not a horror movie and it's not a disgusting movie. Because The Feebles that last week, that was not a horror movie, but it was really disgusting, and I like disgusting movies. But nay, we are not looking at horror, we are not looking at gross. Today, what we are looking at is actually one of the not the very first, but one of the very first recommendations I ever received on this channel. So, recommended by user bboss. This week, we will be looking at Krull from 1983 and directed by Peter Yates. Let me start off by saying get comfortable with me mispronouncing the title of this film throughout the entirety of this. Never once will I ever pronounce Krull correctly. I noticed they pronounce it differently in the film.
The world of Krull.
They do not keep saying it enough for me to retain how to actually pronounce it. I'm gonna keep calling it Krull, even though I know it's technically not how it's pronounced. Whatever. Now, as I said, we look at a lot of horror movies on the channel, and in fact, that's like my niche, what I focus on. But horror is not the only genre that I like. I like quite a few genres, and the genre that we're looking at this week is actually one that I want to start incorporating a little bit more on the channel, and that is fantasy. I love fantasy films, and I feel like I haven't seen enough of them in my lifetime. I mean, like, I've seen enough, but I haven't seen nearly as many fantasy films as I have horror movies. And so it's something that I would like to explore more on this channel. In fact, there is even a third genre I would like to get into in the future as well, but that will remain a secret for now, I think. So as somebody who loves fantasy but doesn't really watch it that often, let me start by saying that this was a very nice and refreshing change of pace. I love horror movies. It's my main go-to genre, but I would be lying if I said that it wasn't kind of nice to do something a little bit different this week. And even though it's not a horror movie, I did find that there were still a few creepy moments that Krull had. Although I don't think that's very uncommon for fantasy. Some of the best fantasy films, at least in my opinion, have at least one scary scene. One scary, awful, traumatizing scene. For me, in my childhood, I was completely traumatized by The Last Unicorn, but I know a whole lot of children and even adults who have been traumatized by my all-time favorite fantasy film, which is The Dark Crystal. And The Dark Crystal, I actually decided to rewatch it while I was writing the review for this, and you know, it's crazy that that's PG. Not really, but I mean, like, it's to expect like a child audience to watch it. Some of those moments are really traumatizing. And before you ask me if I like The Dark Crystal more than Lord of the Rings, I think you severely underestimate how much I love Jim Henson. But we're not talking about that this week. We're talking about Krull. But first, if you are new here, hi, my name is STARGUTZZZ. Any kind of like running or crashing, loud noises that you might hear happening in the background, those are my cats. Also, my movie reviews tend to be more of a discussion of elements that I find to be good or bad about a piece, rather than just giving you this whole play-by-play of every single little thing that happens. So, in other words, I try to refrain from spoilers as much as possible, but they will arise as they relate to the discussion I would like to have with the film. If you would like to watch Krull before or after this review, you can do so on our very good best friend Tubi. There will be a link in the description for you, so it is that much easier for you to go out and watch this film. Of course, it is not a sponsored link. We are not sponsored by Tubi yet. But I do really love them as a platform, and so anytime there is a movie available through Tubi, that will always be my go-to. And with that, let us get right into the rest of this review. After an alien ship lands on the planet of Krull, two kingdoms are faced with the threat of being conquered by a cosmic monster known as the Beast and his lackeys, the Slayers. In hopes of defeating this evil, the kingdoms join together through the union of Prince Colwyn and Princess Lissa. But when Lissa gets kidnapped on their wedding day, Colwyn must journey far to find her. This task is not simple, however, as the Beast's spaceship-turned-castle changes location every day and never reappears in the same place twice. Can Colwyn save his love on time, or will the Slayers and Beast take over the world and bring it into eternal darkness? Well, it is a hero's journey narrative, so you tell me who the winner is. So first, I do want to note that before I watched this, I very lightly skimmed some reviews online about Krull. And one thing that I saw show up many times were people kind of liking the film to Star Wars, or comparing it to Star Wars. Now, I will say I did make a Star Wars comment in my notes while watching this, but I don't think there was really anything substantial there to really directly link this film with Star Wars. Personally, I thought there were only 3 really teeny tiny and kind of minor details in which I thought the film was minutely like Star Wars. First of all, the soundtrack. In times of action, I do feel like the soundtrack got really close to the like dun 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 dun. Like it was doing the running notion of that string of notes. I don't know how am I describing this? There were times where it was running like the dun 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 dun, but like 2 or 3 notes were different just to make it a little bit off, but like you start to kind of hear the beginning of it. So I did hear a little bit of Star Wars within the soundtrack, especially in moments of like great action taking place. Number 2, this one's kind of funny, but anytime a Slayer dies, it kind of sounds like R2 screaming. And then number 3, just laser guns. And that's it. Those were like the 3 details that I thought were like Star Wars. Nothing about like the story itself is like, okay, as I already mentioned, Krull is a hero's journey. And so if people try to relate this to Star Wars because of like Prince and Princess running the galaxy, or like any kind of narrative beats even. If anyone like relates Krull to Star Wars in that manner, to me that's not making a comparison to Star Wars. That's just highlighting how it's a hero's journey, because those are hero's journey elements. That has nothing to do with Star Wars, at least in my mind. The things that these narrative beats that are in Star Wars are in like every film. So if anybody compares this to Star Wars because of narrative beats like that, it doesn't compute to me, because all I see is the hero's journey. So while it is classified as a sci-fi fantasy, I think Krull is way more fantasy than it is sci-fi. But this isn't a complaint. I will go on to discuss all of the ways that I love how these genres get blended together, or how they're separate but they're blended. It's strange, it's good. I'm not complaining that this is more fantasy than sci-fi. It's just a comment. But I do believe it's only sci-fi in one aspect, and we will be going into that a little bit later. I have a whole lot that I want to discuss with this film, so I'm kind of trying to move through this fairly quickly. However, narratively, I mean, it is really truly just like a general standard hero's journey. If you don't know what I mean when I keep saying hero's journey, I'm pretty sure Joseph Campbell is the one that like put it together and really explained what it is, but it's like these narrative beats. Man, it's been so long since I've had to explain it to somebody else. It's basically like narrative beats in a hero's story, and it seems like every hero, like, they go through these steps of their journey, and when they return home, they, like, return a different and changed person. The TLDR, the really bad TLDR that hasn't had to actually explain the hero's journey to anybody in a really long time. Some, like, good examples of what to think of. We're talking about fantasy, so honestly, think of Frodo's journey in Lord of the Rings. Think of Harry's journey in Harry Potter. Think of, what's something that I just mentioned? Think of Jin's journey in The Dark Crystal. Think of Hercules' journey in any rendition of it. Think of like the Odyssey. Think of literally anything that has a classic standard hero that starts from nothing or starts from like very humble beginnings, and after their journey, they have become like this changed, different person. Krull is like a very classic and standard hero's journey narrative. It's fine, there's nothing wrong with that. Majority of stories are hero's journeys. But one thing that can suck about it, and like maybe one teeny complaint that I have, is that with a hero's journey, sometimes the enemy never actually really feels like a threat. The hero's journey, you know how it ends. So, like, shocker that the good guy wins and the bad guy is defeated. Who could have even seen that coming, right? And so because this is like a repeated pattern of the hero's journey, sometimes the enemy, the bad guy that we're fighting against and trying to defeat, they never actually feel like a threat. There are some narratives that do build the tension and you are not sure or not, like they've killed other characters that are important, so like they could end up killing their hero, but they usually don't. But Krull is an example where not only does the enemy not actually feel like a threat, but it is one of those instances where the enemy is killed like way too easily. There not a lot of tension. Not a huge complaint. It's just something that I think naturally happens with the hero's journey narrative sometimes, most of the time. But I also know that there are people who genuinely like get upset or irate whenever that happens. So I guess take this as a warning that like, hey, the enemy in this he's not threatening. He looks really cool, but he doesn't actually feel threatening at all. As I stated, Krull is way more fantasy than it is sci-fi. Honestly, I would even go as far as to call it like classic fantasy, or maybe even classical fantasy. I don't know. But it feels very classic. And I think there are many ways that it does feel classic. I have a list. I can name it off for you, all of the little classical fantasy elements that this film has. But one of these elements is like, it's very simple, and it might even sound a little bit silly, I don't know. One of these ways is simply just that majority of the characters are medievally dressed humans. The brand of fantasy that the world of Krull is that of kings and queens, of peasants and prophecies, with all other species or mythical creatures kind of either being secondary characters or supportive characters. This is something, maybe I'm alone in this, although I kind of doubt it. For some reason, when I think of older fantasy tales, to me they always seem focused on humans as the heroes, or like it's very human forward, with mythical creatures or other supernatural entities. Not a backstep, but they're secondary, right? Like it's usually not somebody who's mystical themselves that is the main character or hero of the story, especially like old fantasy and fairy tales. However, nowadays I do feel like it's a little bit more prevalent talent to explore and create worlds where either humans just don't exist at all or humans don't play as big of a role as other species. This may not even be something that's necessarily true. This is taken from observations that I personally have made in regards to older fantasy and more modern fantasy, or modern. Modern can kind of be subjective. Like, when was Lord of the Rings written? I would still, it might be weird to say that the 1930s is still modern. I would still consider that modern though, compared to like the other fantasy stories that I'm talking about at least. So to me, classic fantasy feels human forward, and modern fantasy, it's just like not so much. It explores different subjects. The vibe of this film in general also reminded me of an old book set that I had as a kid. At first, I was going to sit here and try to describe it to you, but I actually found pictures of them on the internet, and it was extremely easy. But it was a set of fairy tale books that I had growing up, where the art in them was a little bit more mature than your typical children's book. And by mature, I don't mean like mature, like 18 plus. By that, I mean that the art was a little bit more realistic in its depiction of the characters. It was almost like Renaissance or medieval paintings. You're gonna hear me say medieval a lot in this. Medieval is probably technically not even correct, but I don't know. I'm not sure of like the word to use that would be appropriate for it, because I know it's technically not medieval, but maybe I'm right. Maybe it is just a medieval. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. The point is, and I'm sure I've shown the pictures on here, but the storybook had like more realistic depictions of characters rather than them being like very cartoony. Now, the images don't look exactly how I remember them as a kid. I was thinking they were like even more serious and realistic than what I've shown you. But Krull did remind me of the same vibe that these storybooks had. While Krull does have a few moments of like surrealist, strange, odd architecture and imagery within it, overall the fantasy elements remind me of the art within these old fairy tale books that I had. In fact, one of the mythical creatures that we come across in the film, they're presented in a more realistic manner rather than one that's fanciful or even cartoonish, and that is the Cyclops Rel. Now, I'm not saying like I prefer realism. I think if you've been here long enough, you know I don't exactly prefer realism, but I will say that compared to how Cyclopses typically get presented within media, usually it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more cartoonish, and I really like the direction that they went for Rel. Can I also just say, I love Cyclopses. I am so stoked of the fact that there is a Cyclops in this film. They're a mythical creature that I almost feel gets overlooked nowadays, and they don't get used hardly enough. I fucking love Cyclopses, and so just the fact that Rel exists in the first place is awesome. What's great is that he's a great character. I like his character. I like his personality and who he is.
Well, that's a foolish wish. And you, Rel, what would you wish for?
Ignorance.
The whole backstory as to why Cyclopses have one eye. I'm not brushed up on my Cyclops mythology. Editor Rachel, is the backstory they give in the film true to Cyclops mythology? Look it up. So in my findings, I found a lot of discussion on the symbolism behind the eye. I saw a lot of discussion about some more famous Greek mythology Cyclops figures and characters. I saw some discussion about how the origins relate to mammoth skulls, but I did not, at least in my extremely brief research, I did not find anything similar to the origins that are discussed in Krull. That is, except for this Quora comment that literally just quotes Krull, so I don't exactly find that to be credible. But anyway, I love the direction that they went with this character, And specifically what I'm getting at here, I haven't even mentioned. I like the detail that they made his eyeball regular size. So it feels more realistic. He's not walking around with like this comically gigantic eyeball like Cyclopses are typically given. It's like a relatively normal sized eyeball in the center of his face, and I really liked that. Again, not saying that I always prefer realism, but in this case it's refreshing and it's different, and I think it fits the total vibe of the piece for him to have like a more realistic eye. Does that even make sense? So I really like Krill's design. I think it's really good, and I also love the way that they integrate like the face makeup with the actor's actual face. They did a really good job. He's a very realistic and cool looking Cyclops, and on top of that, he has a really good personality. Is he my favorite character? I don't know. I'm not sure. But he's up there for sure. There's another way where I feel Krull is very classic fantasy, and I'm gonna admit it's a little bit silly. It's gonna sound so silly. But another way that it is classic fantasy, at least in my opinion, is that it is a very slow burn. Now, at first, I was just going to kind of note the pacing of this film within the synopsis portion. However, the more I sat here and the more I thought about it, I realized that I don't think I can name a single fantasy film that is not super slow. Even my beloved Dark Crystal, I admit, has some very slow moments. Like, genuinely, I don't think I can name a single fantasy film that doesn't feel slow. So it was going to be something that I note about this film, but actually, I think it's just more evidence as to why it's a classic fantasy, because it's slow. Funny side note story, whenever my husband and I first got together, I tried to make him watch Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, and he fell asleep before the hobbits made it to the Prancing Pony. So the more I think about it, the more I think fantasy in general just tends to be a slower paced narrative style. If I had to give reason to this, I might say Norman. Despite all my rage, I am still just a rat in a cage. If I had to guess as to why this was, I would probably say that it has to do with like world building and story immersion. I'm sure it's got to be something like that as to why fantasy tends to be a little bit more slower than other genres. But that is something that further validates my point that Krull is a classic fantasy film. There's a hero prince with a damsel in distress princess, and a tale of good and evil linked to an ancient prophecy, and it sure takes its sweet damn time getting to the point. You know, I like this movie, I do, but I feel like it's also my responsibility to let you know that, yeah, I did get sleepy a few times. But I think that just tends to be the case with fantasy in general, if I'm being honest. Now, while Krull is primarily a fantasy film, like first and foremost, as I have been mentioning, there is really only one way that Krull is sci-fi, at least in my opinion. And the only sci-fi element is just the antagonists themselves, the Beast and the Slayers. I think one of the coolest things about Krull is how it decides to integrate the sci-fi within the fantasy world. Because rather than blending these two genres and, you know, making it a blend of sci-fi fantasy, you know, perhaps they might do this with like medieval old fantasy clothing but advanced technology. So rather than like blending them that way, like a solid blend of some elements of fantasy, some elements of sci-fi throughout the entirety of the film, what they do instead is that the sci-fi elements come strictly from the antagonists. And it's weird. I'm gonna have some trouble trying to describe this because the sci-fi and the fantasy, they're completely separate, and yet at the same time, the way that the sci-fi does get integrated into the fantasy is really cool. Just bear with me here, let me try to explain. Imagine the sci-fi is like its own separate thing. The sci-fi is a block. Imagine like a block within a big, beautiful fantasy world. It doesn't fit in. It stands out. It's just, how do I put this? I think it's cool that the enemies of this fantasy film, the enemies are from a completely different genre. So it feels even more like a different world coming and invading this fantasy world. I found this to be a very cool and unique way of putting these two genres together without them necessarily being like completely blended together. And as I said, it makes the Beast and the Slayers feel even more like alien intruders because they stick out in this world so much. They literally are not of this world. I highly doubt that the planet of Krull has ever experienced something that is not part of their world. And I feel like this is something that we can easily assume because our medieval fantasy characters obviously don't have modes of transportation that aren't horses, so why would they have spaceships? I think it's really cool. I think it's cool and unique. It's this classical fantasy world with kings and queens and like mythical creatures, and then now suddenly the threat that they are faced with it has to do with alien invaders and an entire eldritch horror from outer space. As I said, I don't know if the medieval ages is technically the right thing to call this, but close enough. On planet Krull, it's basically the medieval ages. They're very clearly not technologically advanced, as I said. So how much do you think the people of Krull even know what's going on in outer space? You know what I mean? And that's what makes this film like so cool and so unique, is instead of blending the genres together, it's looking at one genre as a hero and then the enemy is a completely different genre, just not even of the same world. In my notes, I initially wrote that this is sort of the equivalent of putting stormtroopers within Middle-earth. But honestly, the more I think about it, it's more like putting stormtroopers and Cthulhu within Middle-earth. And I think it's really interesting and it works really well. It's something unique and different, and I love the way that even though the sci-fi is like the tiniest part of this film, I love the way that it's represented and the way that it's integrated within the world. And of course, you know, I have to talk about my absolute favorite detail about these antagonists is just the spaceship itself. The interior of the ship is very surreal and strange and wonky. It's a very like surrealist futurism painting almost. I would liken a lot of the shapes that are happening within the interior of this to something like the Chrome Y2K futurism movement of like the 2000s, 2001. I think it's what we are now calling cyber sigilism. However, instead of being like focused on chrome and metal, it's focused on very dark and earthy tones, which again just fits in with the more fantasy themes. I am absolutely in love with the interior architecture and designs and settings of this spaceship. While the art direction of the film as a whole is really incredible, I feel like it shines the most whenever we get to get these little interior shots of the ship. I do wish that we had spent more time within the Beast ship, like way more time in there. A lot of the main shots are like very nature focused and they are pretty, but the Beast ship is so incredible. It does satisfy the itch a little bit at the end, but still, I would have loved to spend even more time in there. And this might be like my number one absolute favorite tiny detail that this film has. I've been calling this primarily a spaceship, but it is kind of also a castle. We all know the structure is a spaceship, obviously, from the opening credits. We see it flying through space. However, when it lands, it does not land horizontally the way an aircraft might. Instead, it lands vertically. And by doing this, it gives the structure a sort of castle edifice. So even though these are alien invaders from another planet and they are what our primary, not even our primary, but our only sci-fi element of this film, they are the sci-fi of this film. Despite that, their presence within this fantasy world is still somewhat blended and integrated really well by making their ship look like a dark and looming castle. Something that's not too unlike, you know, Mordor or the Skeksis castle. Dude, this is like it's such a minor detail. Like, it is probably the smallest detail I could focus on, but I'm so obsessed with it. I am obsessed with the decision, with the forethought that these people had to, when these alien invaders land on the fantasy planet of Krull, their spaceship pretty much effectively turns into a dark and menacing castle. Like, I think that's so perfect. I love it so much. I think it's brilliant. It is my favorite element. It's my favorite detail of the story. I think it's so clever. It works so well. I love a lot of the artistic direction and decisions that were made behind the making of this film. And speaking of its art direction, I just want to conclude with a few final, very small, like, notes and comments of other things that I have to say about the film that maybe I don't have like a specific section for. So first of all, I of course have to talk about the special effects, the practical effects and makeup and what have yous that this film has, along with a little bit more of some of the art direction that I really like and appreciate. So there is a lot of very neat and beautiful, not only like settings, but special effects. Okay, not all of the special effects are beautiful. I will admit. There are a few corny and bad moments with green screen, but what are you gonna do, dude? But just as a little example, I don't know why they use a whole lot of fire in this. They use a whole lot of fire in this movie. Like, they are using fire any chance they get, to the point that like one of the only mythical creatures we come across are fire horses. This movie fucking loves using fire, and for some reason all of the fire special effects, all of them, they come across so goofy to me. This might be a funny comparison to somebody who knows what I'm talking about, but the fire effects within Krull remind me of the fairy light effect within the film Legend. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's like a little fairy pixie character, and whenever this character is like, it's been a long time since I've seen Legend. I think we do see them as an actual character, but when they're small enough that they're just light traveling, the special effect, I shit you not, it's like literally a flashlight on the wall to represent this like pixie flying. And I don't know why, but the fire special effects in this made me think of that. Anytime fire was being used or was on the screen, it just tickled the absolute shit out of me. I don't know why. It's so corny, it's so bad, and yet it's also so charming. There are a few methods that Krull uses for its practical effects, but you know I have to mention it. There is a single use of stop motion. There is a scene where we get a big and beautiful stop motion spider. And can I also just say, this is my favorite scene of the entire film. Not just like seeing the spider, but the entirety of this moment. The entire widow in the web moment. A favorite scene of the whole film for multiple reasons. Of course, I love the stop motion spider. The spider is beautiful. I love it. I love the set design. I love the look of the nest, like in this cave. The setting for this scene is incredible. It's incredible and beautiful. I love the widow herself. I love all of the like crazy, random, intense lore drop that we get in this moment as well. This whole scene, this is my favorite scene of the movie, is the widow in the web. There's another pretty cool moment that uses like a latex makeup special effects, and this one I can't really go into detail on, but I will say that it has to do with a character named the Seer. Also another great character. I really loved the Seer, and I also love this moment that I can't talk about. But this moment is one of the parts of the film that does get like a little bit creepier. I do wish the film got a little bit creepier more often, but I am satisfied with this moment with the Seer. I think the special effects, the makeup that they use for it is like a little unnerving. And it's also a scene that takes place in a very unique, beautiful fantasy like area. As I mentioned in the beginning, I like it whenever fantasy goes into like more dark places or has scary moments. It's part of fantasy. You need at least one scary moment, right? You need at least one scene that's going to traumatize the child watching it. Overall, I thought Krull was a very beautiful, unique, and classic film to watch. If you can get past the fact that it is a slow burn and it will probably make you feel sleepy at some points, if you can get past that, I do think that it's worth the watch, especially for the way that it like balances the sci-fi and the fantasy. No, maybe not even balance might not be the right word, but the way that they present it. I really love how it's not like actually the two genres blended together. Rather, it's more separated, and yet even though they're separated, the antagonists are still like integrated within the world of fantasy pretty well. It's unique. It's not what I was expecting, but I really like the way that it's pulled off. I love the execution of this film, especially the art direction. The art direction in regards to the antagonists, the beasts, the slayers, and the spaceship castle thing. That is like to me, the best part of the art direction. That's where it shines. That's where we get some of the most interesting and out there architecture and settings. However, that's not to say that the rest of the film is not beautiful. As I said, that Widow of the Web moment, that to me is the most striking and beautiful part of the film. Also, I just realized this, but I didn't really take the time to talk about the characters themselves. The characters are likable, let me say that. I can't think of a character that I didn't really like. Maybe Colwyn I like the least, and that's just because he has like your generic good guy hero personality. But that's not to say that he's a bad character. Like, it's not like he pissed me off or anything. I'm just saying all the characters in this were actually very likable. Even the very dickish and arrogant character of Ergo. I wasn't sure if I was going to like Ergo or not at first, but by the end of it, and especially by my second watch, like, he's a dick.
Share and share alike.
But I don't hate him. Like, he slowly becomes a better person over the course of the film and not so selfish or arrogant in a way. And he's our magician, our wizard basically in this. And I do like his character's progression. But overall, all the characters, I liked them all. I liked them all. Rel was my favorite. The Widow is also a favorite. The Seer is a favorite. Those are probably my top 3 personally. But I also liked all the robbers. Like, I can't think of somebody that I didn't like, so that's something to note as well. This is something that I would definitely rewatch, and if you are someone who likes classic fantasy and fairy tales, I would highly recommend that you watch this as well. Now, what tier will I be placing Krull at? Well, I'm actually going to be placing it on the same tier as another fantasy film that I like a lot, and that I mentioned already in this a little bit. And that tier would be the B tier. It's not bad. I like this movie a whole lot. The only reason that it's not an A tier is the same reason why most things end up in B tier, is that I'm not like super cuckoo crazy about it, right? But I do feel like I like Krull as much as I like Legend. Both Krull and Legend are incredible fantasy stories, incredible like cult classic fantasy stories with very beautiful characters and beautiful settings and everything, but they are also both very slow burns. And because of that, I do need to be in a particular mood to rewatch it. That's not saying that I would never rewatch it. I just have to be in a certain mood. So I think I would put it at B tier. I would put both Legend and Krull at B tier because I like them just about the same. I can absolutely see myself rewatching it. I can see myself like having a kid that watches it in the future, and I thought it was a very nice change of pace from what we typically do on here. And I also hope to cover more fantasy films in the future. So thank you again, B-Boss, for this recommendation. I really enjoyed it, and again, it was a nice change of pace, so thank you very much. And with that, we are done with yet another movie review. Thank you guys so much if you stayed all the way until the very end. If you like this video, please please make sure that you stab that like button. It is a free and easy way to help support this channel. Also, is there a film that you would like to hear my opinion on? Or, now that I have opened the gates to fantasy films, is there a fantasy film you think I should cover this year? Put it in the comments down below and maybe you will see it show up in a future video. Also, did you just like this video so much that you want to hear me ramble about more, well, usually horror movies, disturbing cinema, gross cinema, weird hidden gems on Tubi, trauma, I guess now also fantasy? If you'd like to hear me ramble about more movies in general, please consider hitting that subscribe button and the bell icon so you can be notified every time I make a new upload. Which new uploads are every Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and on the screen are some of my socials as well. Now let me note that next week we are actually not going to have a video. Majority of the week I'm going to be out of town on a father-daughter trip. It's for like my dad's birthday. I got him tickets to go see a play that we both really love. So next week, I'm sorry, there will be no video, which means that I will see you guys again in February, at least on this main channel. Also, if you just want some more StarGutz content in your life, I have a live channel right here. I'm trying to make space for it because I struggle editing, knowing where to put it. All of my past live streams are on there, but we will also be going live tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just doing more dailies in Heartopia, hanging out, chilling, talking. If you would like to join me for that, please consider the live channel, and if you can't make it on time, don't worry, the VODs are saved to the channel for you to watch whenever you would like. And now just one final thank you so much to all of you who stayed around until the very end. Our time here is precious, and the fact that you have used your time to sit here and listen to me ramble about this really cool sci-fi fantasy film, thank you. I really appreciate it. It means a lot to me. I appreciate you and your time and being here watching this video. It really does mean a lot to me. So if I do not see you in the live stream, then I will catch you in the next video in February. But until then, please have a great night and stay safe out there.
Travel with you? Do you know who I am?
No?
I am Ergo the Magnificent. Short in stature, tall in power, narrow of purpose, and wide of vision. And I do not travel with peasants and beggars. Goodbye.